Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing The Face of Deception by Iris Johansen. This book was published in 1998, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by Laurel Lefkow. This book is part of the Eve Duncan series, which as of this recording has 27 books in it, and they're still being published very regularly, so the series has been going on for over 20 years, so I assume it's changed quite a lot. This was the first ever installment, and it's just kind of a fun thriller about a woman whose job is to do facial reconstructions off of skulls that she is given so that she could help identify bodies that would otherwise go unidentified. The whole premise of this book feels very similar to the TV show Bones, with a little bit more emphasis on art than technology, and that could just be because this book was published 7 years before Bones aired for the first time, so technology hadn't quite advanced to that place. But I would assume that the popularity of this series probably contributed to Bones becoming a TV show, but I don't know. So if you want to read a fun, intense thriller with cutting-edge 1990s technology, then I recommend you go read this book and you can come back to hear my opinions. So I loved the 90s vibes in this book. Everything felt very much of that era, and it was published in 1998, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had been around as a manuscript for a while waiting to be published, because a lot of the things felt even maybe a little older than that. It was so much fun to listen to them talk about the cutting-edge technology they were using, and I loved hearing them describe the shoulder pads in their clothing. It was just amazing. All their talk of digital phones in this book made me really want to learn more about the history of cell phones, because they do use the word cell phone at one point. So a cell phone was something else that existed, and I just kind of googled it briefly and didn't learn too much, but I think they had analog cell phones, and maybe as this was coming out, digital cell phones were a new thing and they were somehow harder to track. I've read quite a few modern thrillers, and in modern thrillers they're pretty good at making phone calls and not being caught. People use burner phones now, or in older ones they can stop and use payphones. And I was amazed by how often in this book they made secure calls using landlines that anyone could have traced. And the whole thing where Eve is trying to tell her mother who is going to pick her up so she knows it's safe, but she doesn't want to say the name over the phone because someone could have bugged her mom's house. But they might not have bugged Joe's house, and so she won't tell her mom, but she tells her to just wait for a random fax. If her house was bugged, the people listening could have just said, oh yay, we'll send her a random fax of a person, or dropped something off. She had no way of verifying that it was actually from a reliable source. That whole rigmarole felt very not helpful. And then she did use the landline where she was staying at Logan's mansion, and she called Joe. I couldn't tell, sometimes it was on a landline, I think, but maybe sometimes on his digital phone. I don't know. Either way, it felt like the security about having a safe line was very hit or miss. And then in this book they had this technology where they could listen into conversations. In other books I've read the thing where they pick up the vibrations coming off the glass and windows, things like that. And it was definitely around. It was a new cutting-edge technology, but the villains definitely had it. And so it was weird to me that all these people who are hiding this government conspiracy where the Secret Service is trying to get them weren't more careful about what they said and just assumed that everything they said was completely safe. And it felt very careless and nonchalant to me. And maybe that's just because with the modern thrillers I read, you just kind of assume that if someone wants to listen in, they can, and people have to be a lot more secure. And maybe this was just the point where technology was new enough that they didn't really feel like they had to be that secure because they hadn't known it existed. And it feels like listening devices have been around for a lot longer than the 90s, so I just thought they should have been a little bit more secure about their conversations. The romance in this book was really interesting. They were definitely setting up romances for Eve with both Logan and Quinn, and I was kind of assuming that it would be the kind of thing where Logan was just around for this book and he was kind of the male equivalent of a Bond girl, and he'd kind of just be there for this book to have a grand romance with, and then in the next book he'd be gone, and there was going to be like a slow build and eventually she'd develop a relationship with Quinn. But instead it looks like Logan's going to be sticking around for a while, and I'm not thrilled about that because they did kind of have some chemistry going on and he definitely likes her. But the one time that he touched her, she described it as unsettling. And then the one time she touched him, she described it as feeling very maternal. And neither of those things are feelings you want to have in a romantic relationship, so I was not really okay with that. And then I thought that Eve was just kind of close to Joe Quinn, and maybe he had a little bit of a crush on her, but she clearly wasn't in a place for it, so he just kind of moved on and got married. But no, it turns out that he is madly in love with her and married another woman for some unknown reason, and it's still playing this long game where he definitely plans to date Eve in the future. And that is so not okay. His poor wife must be suffering horribly, and I hope they get divorced very soon because she needs out of this fast. And then at the end, the way Quinn and Logan were just calmly discussing who got to date Eve in what order, and, oh, I'm going to date her eventually, but I don't mind if you sleep with her now. Go ahead. Like, I think she needs that to be good for her, and later she'll be with me. And I just hate it when characters in books do that. It's the exact same thing they do in the Wheel of Time series, when all the women who are love interests for Rand get together and decide how this is going to work and don't include him in the conversation. And this is exactly the same thing. This book is sort of from the same era as the Wheel of Time, so maybe it was just like a 90s thing. I'm really glad we don't see it as much in fiction anymore. It makes me just so uncomfortable, and it's really not okay to be having a romantic relationship with someone and discussing major things about how this is going to work and not including them in that conversation. And this book definitely had kind of tones of 80s feminism in it. It was trying, and it was better than a lot of things at the time, you know. There were a lot of strong female characters in this story. It definitely passed the Bechdel test. The women talked to each other and made things happen. But the book also had to stop and say that each of these women were strong women and kind of make a show of it, and then the men still had to come in and protect them, and the women had to use their soft feminine sides either to manipulate the men or to nurture them properly. And that's just sort of outdated. For the time, I think it was perfectly fine. Just now, it can be a little cringy. And then I was amazed by how hypocritical Eve was, because the villain of the story is the president's wife, and the whole time the book is going on, we think that she's murdered her husband to seize power, so we know she's a villain. And then at the end, we find out that he committed suicide because he had cancer, and the only reason for the deception was to keep their political regime going, which is still not okay, but it's not like murder. And the book didn't change our perspective on her at all. This is a woman who didn't actually kill anybody at the beginning. She lied and committed all kinds of other crimes, but it was kind of to perpetuate the legacy of someone she loved, and then at the end, things were falling apart, and she started killing people who were dangerous to her, which none of that is okay, but I couldn't believe that Eve was so horrified by her behavior when she did almost the same thing. The whole reason Eve was involved with this was because she thought it was morally her duty, basically the same way the president's wife did, and then by the end, Eve basically becomes the president's wife. There's this loose end of the partner, the man who was working with the president's wife, I forgot his name already, but he helps Eve capture the president's wife, and then he flees. He is no danger to Eve at this point, but Quinn is still going to hunt him down and kill him, and Eve doesn't stop him. She knows this is happening, and it's not even because he's dangerous to her. It's because she would be uncomfortable having to sit through a trial with him. That would be just too much emotionally for her to handle. So it's justified for her to have her friend go kill him for some reason. And I couldn't believe that that was something our protagonist did when she so adamantly believed that the president's wife was evil. I also kind of had fun while I was reading this book playing Spot the Character Who's Going to Die Next, because you could see them coming from a mile away. Gil and the nice professor guy, anybody who seems like a really great person, and he's just such a nice guy, and he has these cute little personality traits, and he's so quirky and fun to be around. He likes country music, or he likes barbecue, and he has these sweet sentimental moments. But he also has no sex appeal. He's definitely not going to be a love interest. You can tell that that character is only in the book so that they can kill someone off, and you'll be sort of sad, but not actually that disappointed, because our main characters have to stick around for future books. So overall, I enjoyed this book. It was a fun thriller. You didn't have to think too hard about it. It was really fun to watch all the 90s technology, and things definitely would not play out the same way they do now. And the interpersonal relationships would definitely be written differently too. And because this series is still being published right now, I'm really interested to see what it's like now, because I assume it's changed a lot over the years. I'm almost tempted to just jump ahead and read book 27 and see how differently it's written, but I feel like that would like maybe kind of spoil a few things. You know, I'm enjoying this story and I want to see how it develops. So I think I will go ahead and read the next book in the series, and if I enjoy it, I'll continue on, or I may just skip ahead to the end and see how the writing style has changed. Either way, I'm definitely looking forward to going on more adventures with Eve Duncan.